So we've really come a long way. And even before that, I think it was some 7 or 8 years ago, when Paul first joined the CFA Institute in 2012, coincidentally it happened to be the same month that I joined the Society Board in Singapore. And I've watched Paul do his thing from the time when he started. And so when Shahidul asked me to, after Paul's speech, come and do my usual blurb about global macro and risk and investors and etc., I couldn't think of anything worse to be asked to do. So I thought, why don't we take the opportunity of Paul being here, and all of us, in some form or the other, as students of leadership, take this opportunity to get really personal with Paul. Ask him about his own leadership journey. How is it that he ended up in the role that he is in right now, but more importantly, how is it that he's made the kind of sweeping changes that he has made? And I'll go through some of those from my perspective as someone who's not a member of the Institute, but a member of the network of societies. So we thought we'll ask him some questions about that, not about investments, not about risk, but how do we develop ourselves as professionals at a personal level? How do we achieve success? How do we deal with challenges? So on and so forth. I do think that there are at least two leaders. If leadership is about mobilizing resources with or without positional authority to get towards a certain goal, then I do think that there's at least one other leader that someday I would like to have this conversation with, which is Mr. Shahidul Islam. I think it's incredible what you have achieved in this period. It was also around about the same time, 2012 or 13, when I first got to know of your attempt to bring a society here, and then watched you and cheered you on as you were able to do that. And it really is an incredible, incredible achievement to see this spectacle as we see it right now. So Paul, let's have a dialogue. Do you have a microphone?
I do. I do.
So when you came onto the Institute as Asia Pacific CEO, the Institute had already gone through an inflection point, which is that the global financial crisis had happened, and I saw that there was a change in our tagline. We added, for the ultimate benefit of society, to the mission statement of the Institute. We already had a Future of Finance Council, or a committee, that was announced, and then we didn't really do much. I felt that we sort of stopped. There wasn't a lot of action. The council at the time felt, I remember attending a panel, and it was very male, pale, stale, tired, retired, nothing to do with the future, very much to the past of finance. And then I saw you arrive and you introduced a lot of verve and energy and a whole lot of changes. So I'd like to talk about those. But before that, give us a sense of what you've been up to for the 30 years before you came onto this role.
I wish it was only 30, unfortunately. But,
20 years.
Well, thank you. Well, I started my career as a huge number of people in this room have started it as a chartered accountant. So I trained with Pricewaterhouse for 4 years in London, which is where I'm from. I was born and raised in London, which is very, very close to where Lutfey now lives, in fact. So that was what I did to start with, and then I moved from there into, I was very, very lucky, that was in London. I moved to France, to Paris, to work in an investment management business that I ended up running at quite an early age. It's 2008 tends to dominate our thing, but my big break was 1987, the crash of 1987, October 1987, which cleared out a lot of the dead wood back then and gave my green shoots something to work with. So I ran an asset management business for many years, then moved to Hong Kong in '96 to run a custody and security settlement servicing bank, then set up my own asset management business when that bank was sold. Sold my own asset management business, and then came to the Institute through that route. So I've been an entrepreneur, I've worked in a bank, worked in an asset management company, worked as an auditor, so I've been very lucky worked in New York, in London, in Paris, and Hong Kong. So I've had a very blessed and lucky career.
And at university, you're a history major from Oxford.
Well, yes, I'm a history major. That always goes down really well in Asia, where everyone sort of looks at you and says, particularly not so much necessarily in Bangladesh, but in China, when you tell them you're a history major, their eyes literally sort of revolve into the back of their heads. I wonder why on earth a history major ever did finance. But obviously, as everyone who is a history major knows, you know, you either become a teacher or you get yourself a proper job. So I had to get myself a proper job, so I became an accountant. But the one thing I would say is, Lutfey, I think when I came into the profession, which was back in 1980, I would say 60% of everybody in the profession was a liberal arts graduate of some sort or another. And then around 1990, Big Bang, all that sort of stuff, the industry became very technically driven. And then I think virtually anyone who came into the profession after 1990 is a business or a finance major. And I think that's to the detriment of our profession going forward. Because what we've done is we've narrowed our gene pool, really, to the extent where we kind of have forgotten that at the end of every financial transaction is a human being. And if we can't relate to that human being, if we can't listen to what they need and try and serve them as best we can, we're doomed to sort of pursue a sort of an enclosed environment, really. And I think, you know, you're an ex-investment banker, you know what that feels like, where the client is very remote from you at the end of the day in many of the transactions that we undertake. And I think when you think about artificial intelligence, robotics, the way the industry is changing, I think what we'll find is that some of those softer skills come back into focus going forward. And when I talk to charter holders who perhaps are struggling one layer below C-suite, I think most of them will say that they're great technicians, but they lack sales skills, strategic thought, personnel skills, some of these things that really you absolutely need to get to the C-suite. So I think we really have to rethink some of that stuff, rethink some of the training that we do within the Institute, but also more broadly in our communities, how we can make sure that we keep people broad, because technical disciplines are, a large number of them will get disintermediated by artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. I think it speaks to the point about diversity that you made earlier in the context of gender, but diversity more broadly is also cognitive diversity. And the more vocations, the more widespread the background training of people in the industry, clearly the better, because we get the multiplicity of viewpoints come into being, and we have specific cases of risk management where herd behavior of people trained in the same disciplines the short circuit came into being because somebody from the classics or literature or poetry or history or geography happened to ask questions that were slightly different. So for everyone over here, I told Paul earlier that people here are passionate, they're persistent, they are patriotic, they're positive, and so I expect there to be a lot of questions from the audience, so please start thinking about those as we go along. But now about your role with the Institute, Paul. So I made a list of things that I've observed from a distance as what I feel has changed as a member of the wider network. So first of all, as I said, I felt that after the crisis we went through the motions and we put up the structures and we had the right words, but there wasn't a lot of action. And clearly there's a lot of energy and vigor and action and execution. And I'm curious to know what your theory of change is. How do you think you're able to get an organization which is a non-profit based in Charlottesville and without necessarily the kind of global outlook that we now have? How do you get that sort of thing done? I also saw the way you've enhanced the future of finance setup. There's a lot more content now that gets produced that link up with the industry so that we reach the last mile. The focus on the rest of the world. I see you're in Africa one day, Latin America another, Bangladesh 3 times, as Shahidul said, would have been unthinkable in a previous regime. I see the updates to the curriculum. We now talk a lot more about AI, about fintech. I see a lot more putting our necks on the line when it comes to advocacy. We used to be very safe. We used to approach things softly, softly. Now you write editorials and op-eds advocating things for board governance, for public markets versus private markets. I see the relationship change between the society and the institute. It used to be a love-hate relationship at some point. Now there is complete merger of the brands. Speaking of branding, there's a tremendous branding and marketing. People now know what CFA is. People now have greater awareness of basic concepts of finance so that they're able to talk about a government budget, for example, in countries like the UK, because of some of the literacy work and awareness work that the Institute has done with the population at large. Social enterprise, impact investing, ESG, completely brought to the fore because of the Institute. And then lastly, the net that we now capture used to be very much an asset management, buy-side focused organization. Now we have sell-side, we have regulators, we have academia. So that's just the things that I could think of, and I don't even know of the other things you've done. Please talk us through how you execute on change of that kind.
I'm exhausted just thinking about all that. Well, you're very kind to ascribe that to me. I think what I love about the Institute, I think when you're thinking about your own leadership capabilities, I tried and failed many things during my life, as we all do, and the old cliches are the right ones. It's how you respond to disappointment and defeat that marks you out, and that you learn most of the lessons in life from the things that go wrong to you. And the thing that I learnt sort of quite early on in my career really was that I wasn't an entrepreneur really, although later on in life I proved that to myself again. What I'm actually quite good at is taking businesses that have solid foundations but have kind of lost their sense of direction. And I think that was, for me, that was the Institute when I came into it back in 2012, was that we had so many of the core components of what could constitute success, but we really lacked a narrative and we lacked a focus as to what we were trying to accomplish. And so I think that's what I really, when I distilled down that huge list of things that we've tried to accomplish, I think that's what I brought to it, was to take that mission statement and say, well, how can we really live that mission statement? What can we do? I didn't change the mission statement, so I think that's instructive in terms of my leadership style. I didn't invent a new program. I didn't change the mission statement. Didn't change the name. Didn't change the logo or anything like that. I took what I had and said, well, how can we make this better? Because most of what we need is there. We're just very fuzzy around the edges. We don't really have a narrative that binds us all together, and we don't carry the logic of our actions through. So, to your point, we tended to start a few things, but they fizzled out. There was no dynamism. And so, I guess I brought two personal attributes to it. One is that I'm more of a people person than a technician. So, it's been my greatest pleasure to get out there and to listen to all the members and to find out what they wanted me to do, firstly. And the second thing is I'm a businessman, and I thought, yes, we're a not-for-profit, but why should a not-for-profit not be run like a business? Why should there be no accountability for things that you do? And okay, maybe accountability isn't in dollars and cents, but accountability should be in impact and outcome. And that's really what I tried to bring to the organisation, was to say, stop doing stuff because you want to do it, and start doing things that our clients, our members basically, want us to do for them. And so really that was the thing. I'm also immensely impatient. So a bad thing, but it drives you forward.
Did you meet with resistance or inertia, and how do you overcome that? How do you get momentum to build?
Well, yes, I mean, a lot, and I still do. I would say that you know, the professionalism conversation that we're having tonight probably only resonates with about 65% of charter holders. Not so much here in Bangladesh, but when you go to the United States, for instance, a lot of people have been charter holders for 50 years, and they think of the charter much more as a sort of a gentleman's club than a professional body. So a large chunk of those charter holders still feel that way about the Institute, rather than what we've tried to bring to it, which is this drive towards being a professional body for the investment management industry. And so there's resistance there. There's a huge amount of resistance within my own team. I have 630 staff, and I would say now, yeah, you know, maybe 400, 450 of them are on board, but 150 are sort of still waiting to be convinced, and some of those people occupy positions that, that can do some damage. So you're always trying to find out who those people are and to move them on in their careers.
If you weren't in the office of leadership, if you were, I guess, closer to what a newly minted CFA charter holder is in a larger organization, and they would like to, they're similarly impatient for results and change and action, what advice would you have for them to be able to get movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, moving on in your career is difficult, much more difficult, I think, perhaps than it was in my day. There's much less talent about, much less education around, so you stood out more, so it was easier in some ways to get on than it is today. And I think there's much more of a personal responsibility on you as individuals to manage your own career than there has been in the past. You know, no matter how good you are, or what the quality of the organisation is that you work for, you still have to take responsibility for your own advancement. And the one thing, I have 5 kids who are all between the age of sort of 26 and 32, and so they're into their careers, and the one thing that I say to them always is, the second you stop learning, leave your job. And that, I think, is the best advice that anyone can ever give you, because in today's world, once you stop learning, once you stop growing, you are, I promise you, within 12 months of being fired. So that's just the way the modern world works. So when you feel yourself sort of kicking back and relaxing, then that's the time when you need to sort of change your job, basically. So in your early stages of your career, that is such important advice. You know, it's like being a baby. You know, a baby learns most of what it's got to learn in its first sort of couple of years of development. And I think when you start your careers and when you're a new charter holder, it's that first 5 years that you've really got to push yourself to learn. Don't push yourself necessarily to get advancement in terms of being promoted or being paid more. Hopefully those things will come, but push yourself to learn and to keep developing. And then, if you work hard and you do that, I promise you opportunities will open up for you. So that's kind of the advice.
Is there anything, or are there things that you've had to unlearn? So mistakes from early on that you wish with hindsight you hadn't done, or you've learned the hard way that you could help us avoid through your experience?
Well, specific to leadership, yes, one. I mean, there's one big lesson that I learned in the first role when I was the CEO, when I think I was made the CEO when I was 28, so I was almost certainly too young for it. But it's that your staff are not your friends. And that's the biggest piece of advice that I can give any aspirant leader. Your staff are not your friends. That does not mean that you should be hell on earth to your staff, but it does mean that what your staff look to you for is leadership, guidance, development, strategic direction. They don't need to be your best buddy, They don't need to go out for meals with you. They don't need to go out and be entertained by you. You're there to lead them, not to be their friend. And I think that was the biggest mistake that I made in the first job that I had as a CEO, was I got too close to the staff, and as a result you lose perspective. Over time you lose their respect, and you lose that ability to lead people. So that's the mistake that I most regret in life was that.
Are there any questions from the floor?
I've got one.
Yeah.
I've got one for you.
Is that allowed?
Yes, it is allowed. It is allowed. I want to ask, on behalf of all the Bangladeshis in this room, Lutfey, you are a very successful international academician and business person, great career at UBS. How do you go from Dhaka to that? Tell us your story and tell us the advice that you would give a lot of these young people who've done a global qualification because they want to be part of a global community, how they can globalize themselves.
A series of happy accidents. I think life is a lot about coincidences and finding yourself in situations that you may not have planned for. But without any design, if I wanted to create a narrative around it after the fact, I would say that it helped being open to serendipity, to allow yourself to avail of opportunities that might come from places that you may not have expected. So, you know, my primary school was in Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates. I went to a converse school over there run by Indian nuns, and I took my children there recently, and it looks different, but it's still there. Secondary school, part of the time I was in Namibia, which was Southwest Africa at the time, and my dad was posted there. I did a couple of years here in Dhaka. I went to Scholastica, a great time. Scholastica now is a massive school. At that time was somebody's house, and my classes were in the garage with the table fan whirring behind while you're having your classes. I got a scholarship to United World College, Atlantic College in Wales, and then from then on I went to university in the UK. As I was looking to start a career in banking, and the expectation then was I would do a PhD, but the banks would come to universities and you get tempted, and I ended up at Deutsche Bank, but immediately after was the Asian financial crisis thing. So you didn't really have, once you're in, the expectation was that you'd be fired within months. So it was about scrambling to make yourself as relevant as possible to wherever the need was and the demand was. In my case, the Russians had just defaulted on their bonds, the domestic Russian ruble bonds, which was not expected at that time. And these products, total return swaps, had just been invented, but the process was sloppy. So my glamorous job in the investment bank for the first few months was to go and look for signatures at the bottom of those contracts and see if they reconcile with what we had on our record so that we can enforce those contracts. A couple of years later, we had new accounting standards for derivatives, and I realized that there was a Mars-Venus gap between those who understood derivatives, came from a statistics background, and those who knew accounting and came from a cash flow background. And I felt if I could bridge the gap, then there could be a demand for me. So I was paranoid about being relevant and staying relevant, so I looked for where the demand could be. We lost a sales team in Zurich at the time, and I volunteered to be sent there on a temporary basis until they could repopulate the sales team. Not knowing the language, I had to learn things along the way. I was so paranoid that my peers in London were learning a whole lot more than me being in an outpost at the time, that I spent my evenings teaching myself things that I didn't get a chance to learn. When I came back to London, it turned out I had learned more than the others. So when an opportunity came up to be promoted, my boss had left, so they said to me, why don't you be interim head while we go and look for somebody else to do the job? that was my opportunity to again try and be as relevant as possible. And after a few months, they said, you know, you can do 80% of the job at 50% of the cost. So why don't we give it to you on a permanent basis? Then the euro came about, the single currency, and again I found my opportunity in translating contracts that were previously denominated in dollar Deutschmarks to euros, and you know, really nerdy problems like if you have average rate options and dollar Deutschmarks used to be denominated as number of Deutschmarks per dollars, euro dollar is denominated as number of dollars per euro, so it's flipped around. But the average of the reciprocal is not the same as the reciprocal of the average. Really, really nerdy stuff. So if you pick those things up, you could look for valuation differences, and I had a great time doing things like that. Deutsche Bank acquired Barclays Bankers Trust around that time. And you know, the gentleman who used to run foreign exchange globally at Bankers Trust didn't end up at Deutsche Bank, but a few years later, he had gone to Barclays to build a business over there, so he contacted me, and I got an early opportunity to be on the executive committee for the foreign exchange business and build that with him from scratch. A couple of years later, they wanted to send somebody to Asia to build a client-facing business for Asia Pacific, and we interviewed people. At one point, my wife nudged me to put my hand up. She's Singaporean, and so I came to Singapore. And so it's a set of happy coincidences all along the way. The one thing when I look back is that almost none of the roles that I ended up doing existed before I took them on. Every single role ended up being created for me because I was sort of a business builder, and by the time it became steady state, I had moved on. So, from people.
Can I get one in?
Okay, sir.
I've never worked in an investment bank, and you know, always wanted to, but never had that opportunity. It always, and I think for a lot of young people out here today, ethical dilemmas and how you manage ethical dilemmas are really a challenge for us all in our careers. And you know, the popular image of an investment bank is that it's riddled with ethical dilemmas. You must have come across a few things in your career. What sort of tips would you give young Bangladeshis for how they can identify and cope with ethical dilemmas when they're in that awful position that the business that they work for is perhaps doing something that they might not quite agree with?
So there are shades of dilemmas that you encounter, and I'm sure some of you would know. At one end of the spectrum is pure criminal behavior, and those should be easy to identify, and if not, you know, hopefully organizations will have continuous training programs. I know people now do around anti-money laundering and so on, so that you're sensitized to what's legal and what's not legal. The spectrum, of course, becomes grey when you have cases where it's not a legality issue, it's an ethical issue, and people throw things at you that, over here you hear a lot about culture. This is the cultural way of doing things. You know, so what if I want to take a gift from a client or give a gift to a client? That's the norm, that's the local culture, and so on. Then you have cases where there are genuine dilemmas, and you hadn't thought of them at the time. So the classic one is you have two clients that place the same order for you to execute at a price, and there's only enough liquidity to execute one of them. Which one do you do first? And then what do you tell the person that you did not execute on? The instinct sometimes might be, if you're in a relationship management role, is to lie about what happened. Rather than say that I gave that trade to the other client, you say liquidity was really bad and therefore I'm sorry I couldn't get you a fill. But that is a lie, and that is unethical, and that is, you know, criminal at times. But in the flow of things, you may not think that that is what's going on. So you need to consciously anticipate what those situations could be. You know, emerging markets, I used to run emerging markets, liquidity was a huge issue. If you're expecting a large transaction that the client will have to do at the end of the month, on a Friday, and today it's Monday, and you know that there will not be enough liquidity in that Brazilian real or Mexican peso product on that day, do you pre-purchase some of the client's anticipated requirement on the Monday or Tuesday as a pre-hedge, or is it front-running? Because if your pre-purchase causes the market to move against the client, then did you end up providing a worse outcome for the client, even though you had intended for it to be that way? Bottom line is, we will always face dilemmas, and there will be lots of cases when there will be judgment calls to be made. Different people have different ways of coping with it. Mine has always been to document my thought process, so that I know, after the fact, I can go back, and even if it turned out to have been the wrong decision, I know what my thought process was, and why is it that given the set of facts that I had at that point in time, I took the decision that I took in that situation. So process is really important. Documenting things is really important. That's part of being a professional. We can't run this like a family business or something you would do in a casual way. Professionalism means documenting things, which at times means inefficiency. It at times means slowing things down. It at times means giving up on business that your competitors are running towards. And that takes a conscious element of restraint and process. The one last thing I'd like to say on this point is, you also have cases where you end up taking really dumb risk management decisions. So I don't think we've decided yet, when we vilify investment bankers, whether they were evil or dumb, because there are some cases where it was just plain stupid what was done, with very little gain to the individuals involved. And this is to recognize that you can actually have individuals in an organization who are individually well-meaning and trying to do the right things, but in aggregate they come together and end up with a really stupid decision because of the organization culture. And when I did a look back on some of the largest losses, whether it's Citi, UBS, and others through the crisis, and you try and understand how is it that those trades were ever approved through the organization, and it turns out that the culture was one of checkbox ticking. The culture was one of silos. So if what I'm doing is right, then I don't have the right to ask you whether what you're doing is right or wrong. So the organization culture did not encourage challenge, constructive challenge. The risk committee meetings used to be held like the, I'm sorry, am I talking too much, or can I carry on?
Yeah, thank you. We're going to finish in 2 minutes.
Okay. Shall I finish the point, or?
Finish the point.
Okay. Risk committee meetings. It's like the British House of Parliament. You have Her Majesty's government, who pretends there's nothing wrong with the trade that's being proposed, and you have the leader of the opposition, who pretends that every element of that risk, of that trade, is full of catastrophic risk. And I know there's people here from risk management functions at various banks, so you know what I'm talking about. And you shout past each other, the two ships sail past each other, the quality of conversation is not great, and you end up with decisions that may sometimes be based on who shouted the loudest. One of the things I did is I thought I'd experiment with alternative ways of conducting risk meetings. So if you're familiar with Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats, school children get taught those as ways of thinking through issues. So there are 6 hats, different colors. The blue hat is about blue skies thinking, the white hat is about facts. If you want to get emotional, you can pull up the red hat. The green one is for creativity and regeneration, so on and so forth. So what you end up doing is you said everybody must put on the same hat when we're discussing an issue. So if you're putting on a positive hat, and then you ask the risk manager to tell you what are the good things about the trade, and you watch him or her squirm on the seat, trying to come up with good things. And then you do the same thing, you put on the negative hat, and you ask the risk originator to cough out what are the things that could actually go wrong. You make sure that everybody looks at all the perspectives, and then when a decision is taken, even if it doesn't go your way, you know that you've been heard. And you would often go, hang on, I need to put the red hat on. The reason I don't like this trade is because you lied to me on the previous trade.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with this one, but basically I'm going to put my foot down and not approve because of that. So risk management processes are important, and diversity is important. How many people do you have around the table who come from a slightly different perspective, who is willing to ask the stupid questions so that they can help slow things down and really get to the bottom of things. So those are the processes that have helped us.
May I ask a question?
Yes, one question.
So my question is that as a young professional, what should I do? Should I stay in the dirty sectors, dirty institute, and wait for a days while it will be restructured, things will be cleaned up, directors will be literate, and bank management will be putting the more light on training the people and take the right decisions, and we will be put in the responsible positions, and I will be directing the bank to the right path. Or I should get away from these dirty sectors to the cleaner sectors and get my life more easier. What do you think?
It's the question that we have to face individually across a whole bunch of decisions in our life. It's whether that you think by engaging with a problem you can make it better, or whether you just ignore that problem. And there are so many situations in life where you can sort of have that duality of challenge. And it kind of depends on the sort of person that you are, I think, is how you answer that question. For me, I have to be in the fight. So that's just who I am, and but it's not for everybody. And so I think you kind of have to sort of look into your heart a little bit and decide what sort of a person that you are. And the way that you told that story makes me think that you already made your mind up and that you perhaps want to pursue your career elsewhere. And I think you're going through the right process, and that there isn't an answer is the question. It is the true answer. It's how do you like to live your life, and what's important to you. And some people, I would be one of them, quite enjoy sort of running against brick walls and smacking your head against them. Others find that a rather tiring activity and would rather not do that, and would rather find other ways of pursuing their passions. So that's it's the best I can do really. Is that and the only other thing I would say is the grass is always greener. Whatever industry you look at has corruption, has challenges, has ethical dilemmas. So don't move on the expectation that life is necessarily going to be any better. What I have found in my life in finance is, and it kind of goes to some of the points that Lutfey was trying to make, is that 99% of everybody in finance is as honest as the day is long. The problem is that the way that we structure businesses within finance makes us collectively behave much, much worse than we would do as individuals. So there's a real culture trap there. Why is it that you and I can go out together and be nice and friendly to one another, but if it's in a business context, we try and cut one another's throats, basically? Why is that? Why do our businesses force us into these challenging positions? And I think that's where we have to engage, and we have to try to improve the cultures of our business around the outcomes that we're trying to promote for our clients. And, you either want to engage in that, or the whole thing turns your stomach. And I can understand why it would do so, by the way. I mean, one of the challenges, the older you get, the more cynical you get. You're a young man, so 20 years' time you're going to be feeling a lot worse than you are today, I can assure you.
But my addition to that is, again, it depends on your theory of change. Do you change things by focusing on one or two issues that can be changed, and try and get the flywheel to move one round at a time? Or do you try and boil the ocean all at the same time? I go to roundtables here where people say, there's corruption in the country, and that's it. Instead of arms in the air, there's corruption in the country, and we want to make everything clean straight away. And we've seen in the past when you've tried to move from poor governance to great governance in one go, the economy goes into cardiac arrest, and there's a pace of change that needs to be gone through. But there is also a role for those who only want revolutionary change, and you need them in the ecosystem who lob the grenade, and they want to, they want radical revolution straight away. change the system ground up. So it depends on your theory of change, whether you want to play a part in that or not. If you take the view that I do, specifically on the Bangladesh context, it is a very small number of people that contaminates our industry in this country. You can see this even in the non-performing loans portfolio, handful of names that repeat. And the vast majority would like to do the right thing, but there's a coordination failure. It's like, if everyone knows that driving the car on the left-hand side is the correct thing to do, but if you're the only person who moves across and everyone else is driving in the opposite direction, you get run over, and therefore no one wants to move. So there is a coordination problem, which I think gets in the way, but it's not like individually people do not want change to happen. I think where places like CFA can help is by convening groups of people, and through the Future of Finance project in the UK, and we've done it in the US and other places, we convene people in small round tables across various roles, no cameras, so let's make it Chatham House rules, and let's talk about how we get movement on something that is stuck because of coordination failure. This issue of purpose in financial services organization. How do we get people to not be only motivated by money in investment banks? So we had the divisional CEO of an investment bank at one of our Future of Finance salons. He said, yeah, I see that the millennials in my organization are really not motivated by money to the same extent that one layer below me are. But I still need to pretend with the group CEO that they are, so that at the end of the year I can get a big bonus pool from which I can then allocate people based on behavior, culture, conduct, etc., etc. But in order to do all of those things, I need to make sure first that I get a big piece of the pie, and that's why I play up the importance of compensation for my people. So if there's a way I can, you can break that for me, the principal agent problem for me, then that would be really helpful. So by convening, I think the CFA Society can really help push the needle forward. In Singapore, they've done it with corporate governance, family-run businesses. They list in the stock market, still like to run it like a family-run business. How do you get them to change their ways? You can go full frontal and embarrass them and do that, but maybe the more effective way is to do it, convene, and appeal to their incentives and to their enlightened self-interest. And I think that's how you then move. And that may also be what has happened to the Bangla film industry. I don't think they're as bad as you say they are.
I think we should.
There's one last question, then we'll go to dinner.
Definitely go to.
Paul and Mr. Lutfey, regarding the investment management industry, if you take your working life as a sample, whatever you have seen in the other parts, how it's like fruitful are the investment committees are, and what we can do as the investment committee members to get a better outcome from the investment committee, so that we get the better result for whatever objective we have.
I think committees, almost by definition, result in a dilution of decision-making capability. So I think one needs to start from that perspective and say that if a committee isn't well run by its chair, then the likelihood is that the outcomes will be poor. And I'm not a great fan of committees unless you have very strong chairing, very strong, obviously set up very strong policy statement, all of the the documents that we teach that you should have behind an investment committee, all of those things which help the committee really think through what they're trying to do. But in reality, I always find that decision making is diluted.
I agree with all of that. It's in the design of the committee and the objective of what we're trying to achieve. If it's one person's family office, then you don't need a committee and off you go. But you do need a committee for making sure that there aren't blind spots in your vision, that you're getting the perspective from all sorts of ways, that you have proper devil's advocates in there. But then a decision needs to be taken. So the committee doesn't become the chief investment officer or the chief executive officer. The committee is there to inform and enrich the decision, but not to take the decision for you. With that, we're going to go to dinner. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Paul.